The widow, Katherine Brennan, stood at the edge of San Pedro's dusty main street in the scorching August heat of 1872, her black mourning dress drawing stares and whispers like flies to honey. She had buried her husband Thomas 3 months prior, a man 20 years her senior, who had left her his general store and little else except debts she was only now discovering. At 38 years old, Katherine knew what the townspeople said about her, how they counted on their fingers and shook their heads, remembering that Thomas had been 58 when he died of a heart seizure while unloading flour sacks in the storeroom. "Shame about Mrs. Brennan," one woman muttered to another as they passed, their parasols casting shadows across the wooden boardwalk. "She's older than her husband was when they married. 38 and alone now. Who'll want her?" Katherine's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward. She had heard worse in the weeks since Thomas's death. The store was struggling, creditors were circling, and the summer heat seemed to press down on San Pedro like a physical weight. The coastal town usually enjoyed ocean breezes, but this August had been merciless, the air thick and still. She pushed open the door to her store, the bell jingling overhead. Inside, the shelves looked sparse. She had sold what she could to pay immediate debts, but it was not enough. The bank would come calling soon, and she had no answers for them. The door opened again behind her, and she turned to see Mayor Hutchins, a portly man with a handlebar mustache that drooped in the heat. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, removing his hat, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "What can I do for you, Mayor?" Katherine asked, though she suspected she knew. "It's about the store, madam. The town council has been discussing your situation. We know Thomas left some obligations unfulfilled, and we're concerned about the property." "I'm working on it," Katherine said firmly. "I have plans to restock and increase business." The mayor shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Brennan, perhaps you should consider selling. A woman alone, trying to run a business in these times, it's not practical. There are interested buyers who could take the burden off your shoulders." "At half what it's worth, I'm sure," Katherine replied, her green eyes flashing. "Thank you for your concern, Mayor, but I'll manage." After he left, Katherine sank into the chair behind the counter. The truth was, she did not know how she would manage. Thomas had been a poor businessman, extending credit to people who never paid, ordering stock that did not sell. She had tried to advise him, but he had patted her hand and told her not to worry about such things. Now those things were all she had to worry about. The bell jingled again, and Katherine looked up, ready to paste on a shopkeeper's smile. Instead, her breath caught. The man who entered had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. He was massive, easily 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that struck her, a clear gray blue that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore buckskin trousers and a worn cotton shirt that stretched across a chest and arms corded with muscle. A knife hung at his belt, and he carried a rifle with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "I'm looking for supplies. Heard this was the only general store in town." Katherine stood, smoothing her skirts. "It is. What do you need?" "Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition if you have it, dried beans, sugar." He moved through the store with surprising grace for such a large man, his eyes scanning the shelves. "I have most of that," Katherine said, following him. "The ammunition is limited. I haven't been able to restock fully." He turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of his gaze. "You're the owner?" "I am. Katherine Brennan." "Tobias Fletcher," he said, nodding. "Folks call me Toby. I'm up in the mountains, trapping mostly. Come down every few months for supplies." "A mountain man," Katherine said. She had heard of such men, living alone in the wilderness, as comfortable with nature as most people were in their parlors. "That's right." He continued gathering items, piling them on the counter. "Heard the previous owner passed. My condolences." "Thank you." Katherine began tallying his purchases. "That will be $8.40. Tobias pulled out a leather pouch and counted out the money and coins in a few bills. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. "You planning to stay in town long?" Katherine asked, surprising herself with the question. "Few days. Need to sell some pelts, get my supplies, maybe get a decent meal that I didn't cook myself." He gathered his purchases. I'll be back for the rest tomorrow. Too much to carry in one trip." After he left, Katherine found herself thinking about him as she closed up the store that evening. There was something solid about Tobias Fletcher, something dependable. In a town full of men who looked at her with either pity or calculation, he had simply looked at her like a person. The next morning, she opened the store to find him waiting outside, leaning against the post with his arms crossed. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. He was probably in his early 40s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. His arms, bare below rolled-up sleeves, were thick with muscle, the kind that came from splitting wood and hauling water and doing everything the hard way because there was no other choice. "Morning, Mrs. Brennan," he said. "Mr. Fletcher, you're early?" "Habit. Sun's been up for hours already." He followed her inside. "I was thinking about your situation." Katherine stiffened. "My situation?" "The store. I heard talk yesterday. Town's buzzing about how you're going to lose it." He held up a hand as she started to protest. "Not my business, I know, but I had a thought. You need money. I need a reliable place to get supplies without coming all the way to Los Angeles. What if we made an arrangement?" "What kind of arrangement?" Katherine asked carefully. "I pay you in advance for a year's worth of supplies. You order what I need, keep it stocked, gives you capital to work with, gives me a guaranteed source." He named a figure that made Katherine's eyes widen. "That's very generous, Mr. Fletcher." "It's practical. I don't like dealing with people much. Rather deal with one person I trust than take my chances every few months." He looked at her directly. "You strike me as honest. That's rare." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the weather. "I would need to draw up a contract." "Fine by me. I'll be at the boarding house for a few days. You work out the details, and we'll sign." Over the next 3 days, Katherine saw Tobias regularly. He would stop by the store, sometimes to add items to his list, sometimes just to check on her progress with the contract. She found herself looking forward to his visits. He did not treat her like a helpless widow or a woman past her prime. He talked to her about business, about fair prices, about the quality of goods. On the third evening, as she was closing up, he appeared at the door. "Got time for supper?" he asked. "There's a decent restaurant down the street. Figure we should celebrate our business arrangement." Katherine hesitated. She had not dined out with a man since Thomas died. The town would talk. "They're already talking," Tobias said, as if reading her mind. "Might as well give them something worth talking about." She laughed, surprising herself. "All right, let me lock up." The restaurant was small but clean, run by a Chinese family who had come to California during the gold rush and stayed. Tobias ordered for both of them, and Katherine found herself relaxing as they ate. "How long have you been in the mountains?" she asked. 20 years, give or take. Came west after the war. Didn't much like what I found back east, so I kept going until I ran out of east." He took a drink of coffee. "Found a valley up in the mountains, built a cabin. Been there ever since." "Don't you get lonely?" "Sometimes. But I get lonely around people too. At least in the mountains, the quiet makes sense." He looked at her. "What about you? How'd you end up in San Pedro?" Katherine told him about growing up in Boston, about meeting Thomas when he came east on business, about moving west as a young bride full of dreams. "He was a good man," she said. "Not a practical man, but good. He saw the best in everyone." "And you saw the reality," Tobias said. "Someone had to," Katherine smiled sadly. "I tried to help him with the business, but he thought I worried too much. Turns out I didn't worry enough." "You're doing fine now. Store will be back on its feet in no time. Thanks to you. Thanks to you being willing to work hard. Money doesn't fix everything. Takes someone with spine to turn things around." He leaned back. "That's what I saw in you first day. You got spine." Katherine felt something flutter in her chest, something she had not felt in years, maybe ever. As they walked back to the store, the evening air finally cooling, Tobias said, "I'm heading back up to the mountains tomorrow, but I'll be back in 6 weeks or so. You need anything before then, you send word to the trading post in the foothills. They know how to reach me." "I'll be fine," Katherine said. Then, impulsively, she added, "But I'll look forward to your return." He smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "So will I, Mrs. Brennan." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Katherine used Tobias's advance payment to restock the store, to pay off the most pressing debts, to hire a boy to help with heavy lifting. Business picked up as word spread that the store was under new management, that prices were fair and the shelves were full. But in the quiet moments, Katherine found her thoughts drifting to the mountain man. She remembered the way he moved, all controlled power, the way he listened when she talked, really listened, the way he made her feel capable and strong instead of desperate and alone. She told herself it was foolish. He was a customer, nothing more. He lived in the mountains, and she lived in town. He was probably 10 years younger than her, though it was hard to tell with his weathered face. And she was still in mourning, even if the prescribed year felt like a prison sentence. But her heart did not listen to logic. When Tobias walked into the store 7 weeks later, Katherine's pulse jumped. He looked the same, maybe a bit more tanned, his hair a bit longer. He carried a pack of furs that he set down carefully. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, and the way he said her name made her stomach flip. "Mr. Fletcher, welcome back. Store looks good. You've been busy." They fell into an easy conversation as she helped him gather his supplies. He told her about a bear that had tried to raid his food stores, about a storm that had blown through the mountains, about the silence of snow falling on pine trees. She told him about the store's progress, about the mayor's surprise when she paid off a major debt, about the women who were slowly starting to treat her like a person again instead of a cautionary tale. "They still talk, though," Katherine said. "About my age, about being alone. Mrs. Henderson made a point of telling me yesterday that I was older than Thomas was when we married. As if I didn't know." Tobias's jaw tightened. "People talk because they got nothing better to do. You're doing fine." "I'm 38 years old, Mr. Fletcher. In this town, that makes me practically ancient for a woman alone." "You're not ancient." He looked at her with those clear gray-blue eyes. "You're just right." The words hung in the air between them. Katherine felt her breath catch. "Just right for what?" she asked softly. "For whatever comes next." He picked up his supplies. "I'm staying in town for a week this time. Got business to attend to. Maybe we could have supper again?" "I'd like that." They had supper that night, and the next night, and the night after that. Tobias told her about his life before the mountains, about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about fighting in the war and seeing things that made him want to disappear into the wilderness. Katherine told him about her marriage, about the loneliness of being with someone who loved her but never really saw her. On the fourth night, as they walked along the beach, the Pacific Ocean stretching dark and vast before them, Tobias said, "I'm 42 years old, Katherine. I've lived alone for 20 years because I never found anyone who made me want to do otherwise." Katherine's heart was pounding. "And now?" "Now I'm thinking maybe I was just waiting." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I know it's too soon. I know people will talk even more than they already do. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see a widow or a woman past her prime or any of the things they say. I see someone strong and smart and beautiful. I see someone I want to know better." "Tobias," Katherine whispered, "I'm older than you. By 4 years. So what?" He reached out and gently touched her face. "You're just right for my years, Katherine. Just exactly right." She leaned into his touch, feeling tears prick her eyes. "People will say terrible things. Let them. I stopped caring what people said a long time ago." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Question is, do you care?" Katherine thought about the whispers, the pointed fingers, the judgment. Then she thought about the way Tobias made her feel, alive and valued and desired. She thought about spending the rest of her life trying to please people who would never be pleased. "No," she said, "I don't care." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, as if she were something precious. Katherine kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his broad chest, feeling the solid strength of him. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Tobias said, "I want to court you properly. I know I'm not much. I live in a cabin in the mountains, and I'm gone for weeks at a time. But I'll build you a better house. I'll come to town more often. I'll do whatever it takes." "I don't need a better house," Katherine said. "I need honesty and respect and someone who sees me as a partner. Can you give me that? Every day for the rest of my life, if you'll have me." Then court me, Tobias Fletcher, and let the town say what it will. The town said plenty. Within days, everyone in San Pedro knew that the widow Brennan was being courted by the mountain man. The gossip was relentless. "She's older than her husband was when they married," Mrs. Henderson said loudly in the store one day, making sure Katherine could hear. "And now she's taken up with a wild man from the mountains. It's unseemly." Katherine looked up from her ledger. "Mrs. Henderson, if you're going to gossip about me, at least have the courtesy to do it outside my store." The woman huffed and left, but others were not so easily dismissed. The mayor came by to express his concerns. The minister suggested that perhaps Katherine was not thinking clearly in her grief. Even some of the women who had been friendly turned cold, but Tobias was unmoved by it all. He came to town every 2 weeks now, staying for several days each time. He helped Katherine with the store, lifting heavy crates and repairing shelves. He escorted her to church on Sunday, sitting beside her in the pew and ignoring the stares. He took her on long walks and told her about the mountains, painting pictures with his words of a life that was hard but free. 3 months into their courtship, on a cool November evening, Tobias took Katherine up into the foothills to see the sunset. They sat on a rocky outcrop, the town spread below them, the ocean beyond. I love you," Tobias said, his arm around her shoulders. "I know it's fast, but I'm too old to play games. I love you, Katherine. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you don't back down from anything. I love how you run that store like a general commanding troops. I love the way you laugh when you think no one's listening." Katherine felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you too. I didn't think I could feel this way again. Maybe I never felt this way before. Thomas was comfortable. But this is different. This is fire and lightning and coming home all at once." "Marry me," Tobias said. "I know people will talk. I know they'll say you're too old or I'm too rough or we're moving too fast. But I don't care about any of that. Marry me, Katherine. Be my wife. Build a life with me." "Yes," Katherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in December, in a small ceremony at the church with only a handful of guests. Most of the town stayed away, making their disapproval clear. But Katherine did not care. She wore a simple blue dress, not white, because she was no blushing bride. Tobias wore new clothes, his hair trimmed but still long, his massive frame barely contained by the suit jacket. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Tobias kissed her with a passion that made the few guests gasp. Katherine kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and defiance into it. The reception was held at the store, which Katherine had closed for the day. They served simple food and cheap wine, and the few friends who had come celebrated with genuine joy. "Where will you live?" asked Sarah Chen, the restaurant owner's daughter, one of the few young women in town who had remained friendly. "We're going to split our time," Katherine said. "Winters in town, running the store. Summers in the mountains, at Tobias's cabin. I've hired someone to manage the store when we're gone." "You're going to live in the mountains?" Sarah's eyes were wide. "I am. Tobias has been alone long enough, and I think I'd like to see what it's like, living somewhere where people don't count your years and judge your choices." That night, in the room above the store that had been Katherine's lonely bedroom for months, Tobias made love to his wife with a tenderness that made her weep. His large, scarred hands were gentle on her skin. His kisses were reverent, and when he held her afterward, Katherine felt safer and more cherished than she ever had in her life. "No regrets?" Tobias asked, his deep voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "Not a single one," Katherine said. "You? Only that I didn't find you 20 years ago." "We found each other when we were supposed to," Katherine said. "We're both old enough to know what we want and brave enough to take it." They spent the winter in San Pedro, and Katherine discovered that marriage to Tobias was nothing like her first marriage. Thomas had been kind but distant, treating her like a delicate ornament to be protected. Tobias treated her like an equal, asking her opinion, respecting her decisions, supporting her ambitions for the store. He also made her laugh, something she had not realized she missed. He told stories about his adventures in the mountains, about the animals he encountered, about the beauty and danger of living close to nature. He taught her to shoot, taking her out to the hills and patiently showing her how to handle a rifle. "A woman should know how to protect herself," he said. especially if she's going to be living in the mountains part of the year. The town slowly began to accept their marriage, if not approve of it. The store continued to thrive, and Catherine's business acumen earned grudging respect. Tobias's quiet strength and obvious devotion to his wife softened some hearts, but there were still whispers, still pointed fingers, still women who made sure to mention that Katherine was older than her husband, as if it were a scandal. One day in March, Katherine was in the store when she overheard two women talking outside. "She's older than her husband was," one said. "It's not natural. What does a young, strong man like that see in a woman pushing 40? Before Katherine could respond, Tobias's voice cut through the air. He had been unloading supplies from a wagon and had clearly heard every word. "I'll tell you what I see," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "I see a woman who's strong enough to run a business on her own, smart enough to turn a failing store into a success, brave enough to face down a whole town's judgment and not back down. Beautiful enough to take my breath away every time I look at her." He stepped closer to the women, who shrank back from his size. "And she's just right for my years, just exactly right. Now, if you ladies are done gossiping, I suggest you find something more productive to do with your time." The women scurried away, and Katherine came out of the store, her eyes shining. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." Tobias pulled her close, right there on the street where anyone could see. "I'm tired of people disrespecting you. You're my wife, and I'm proud of that. Let them all know it." He kissed her, long and deep, and Katherine heard gasps from passers-by. But she did not care. She wrapped her arms around her husband's neck and kissed him back, claiming her happiness in front of the whole town. When they finally pulled apart, Tobias said, "Ready to see the mountains? Spring's coming. Time to head up to the cabin." Katherine had been both excited and nervous about this part of their arrangement. She had never been more than a few miles from town, and the idea of living in the wilderness was daunting. But she trusted Tobias, and she was curious about the place that had been his home for so long. They left in early April with a wagon full of supplies and Katherine's heart full of anticipation. The journey took 3 days, climbing higher into the mountains with each mile. The air grew cooler and cleaner. The trees grew taller. The silence grew deeper. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they rounded a bend, and Katherine saw the valley. It was breathtaking. A small meadow nestled between mountains, with a stream running through it. Wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, and in the center, surrounded by towering pines, was a log cabin. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed. "It's home," Tobias said. "Our home now." The cabin was larger than Katherine had expected, with 2 rooms and a loft. Tobias had built it himself, and every log was perfectly fitted. Inside, it was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table, and a bed frame that looked almost comically small for Tobias's large frame. "I'll build us a bigger bed," he said, looking embarrassed, "and more furniture. I wasn't expecting to share this place with anyone." "It's perfect," Katherine said, and she meant it. There was something peaceful about the cabin, something that made her feel like she could finally breathe. Over the next weeks, Katherine learned what it meant to live in the mountains. She learned to cook over an open fire, to preserve food, to recognize animal tracks. Tobias taught her everything patiently, never making her feel foolish for not knowing. She learned that her husband was even more impressive in his element. He moved through the forest like he was part of it, reading signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth. He could bring down a deer with a single shot, field dress it, and have meat cooking within an hour. He could predict weather by the behavior of animals and the smell of the air. But he was also tender with her, showing her the hidden beauty of the wilderness. He took her to a waterfall that thundered down from the heights. He showed her where wild strawberries grew. He taught her the names of birds and plants. At night, they would sit by the fire, and Tobias would hold her close, and they would talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes they would make love on the bearskin rug in front of the fire, and Katherine would marvel at how free she felt, how uninhibited, with no neighbors to hear and no society to judge. One evening in June, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Katherine said, "I never knew life could be like this." "Like what?" Tobias asked, his arm around her. "So simple, so real. In town, everything is about appearances and expectations. Here, it's just about living." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I understand now why you stayed up here for so long." "It's better with you here," Tobias said. "I didn't realize how lonely I was until I wasn't lonely anymore." In July, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She had not expected it, had thought perhaps she was too old. But the signs were unmistakable, and when she told Tobias, his face lit up with a joy that made her heart swell. A baby," he said, his large hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, suddenly nervous. "I know we didn't plan this." "Happy?" "Katherine, I'm over the moon. I never thought I'd have a family, never thought I'd want one, but now, with you, it's all I want." He kissed her softly. "We'll need to go back to town before winter. I want you near a doctor when the time comes." They returned to San Pedro in September, and the news of Katherine's pregnancy spread quickly. The gossip reached new heights. "At her age," the women whispered, "it's dangerous, unseemly." But Katherine ignored them. She felt healthy and strong, and Tobias was attentive to her every need. He had built a cradle during their last weeks in the mountains, carving it from pine and sanding it smooth. It sat in their bedroom above the store, waiting. The baby came in February during a storm that lashed the coast with wind and rain. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Katherine feared she would not survive it. But Tobias was there, holding her hand, his strength anchoring her. When the baby finally came, a lusty cry filling the room, the doctor said, "It's a boy, a big, healthy boy." Katherine wept with relief and joy as they placed her son in her arms. He was indeed big, with a shock of dark hair, and his father's strong features already visible in his tiny face. "What should we name him?" Tobias asked, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at his son. "Thomas," Katherine said, "after my first husband. He would have been happy for us, I think. He always wanted me to be happy." "Thomas Fletcher," Tobias said, testing the name. "It's good. It's strong." The town's attitude began to shift after Thomas was born. It was hard to maintain disapproval in the face of such obvious happiness. Katherine and Tobias were clearly devoted to each other and to their son. The store continued to prosper, and Tobias, despite his rough exterior, was unfailingly polite and helpful to everyone. Slowly, grudgingly, San Pedro accepted them. They fell into a new rhythm. Winters in town with the baby, Tobias helping with the store, and doing odd jobs for people who needed his strength and skills. Summers in the mountains, with Thomas growing strong and brown in the clean air, learning to walk on the meadow grass, learning to love the wilderness as his father did. When Thomas was 2, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, the town's reaction was more positive. She was a respectable married woman now, a mother, a successful businesswoman. Her age was no longer mentioned, or if it was with admiration rather than censure. Their daughter was born in the spring, a tiny thing with Katherine's green eyes and a surprisingly loud voice. They named her Sarah, after the restaurant owner's daughter who had been one of Katherine's few friends during the difficult early days. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The store thrived under Katherine's management, and the reliable custom of Tobias's mountain friends who had started coming to San Pedro specifically to trade with the Fletchers. Tobias built an addition onto the cabin, making it larger and more comfortable for their growing family. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Sarah was more like her mother, practical and observant, with a head for numbers that showed itself early. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Tobias took Katherine back to the rocky outcrop where he had proposed. The children were with Sarah Chen, who had become a close friend and trusted babysitter. 5 years, Tobias said, holding Katherine close as they watched the sunset. "Best 5 years of my life." "Mine too," Katherine said. She was 43 now, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes. But she felt more beautiful than she ever had, because she saw herself reflected in Tobias's eyes and knew she was loved completely. "Do you ever regret it?" Tobias asked. "Marrying me, dealing with all the gossip, splitting your time between town and mountains?" "Never," Katherine said firmly. "You gave me a life I never knew I wanted. You gave me freedom and adventure and a love that makes me feel alive. How could I regret that?" "They still talk sometimes," Tobias said, "about your age, about us. Let them talk. Katherine turned in his arms to face him. "You told me once that I was just right for your years. You were right. We're just right for each other, no matter what anyone else thinks." Tobias kissed her, and Katherine felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first day in the store, when a mountain man had walked in and changed her life forever. The years passed, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet confidence and love of the wilderness. Sarah grew sharp and clever like her mother, with a gift for business that promised she would take over the store someday. When Katherine was 47 and Tobias was 49, they had one more child, a surprise that shocked them both. Another boy, whom they named Daniel, who came into the world with a smile and kept smiling through everything. 3 children, Katherine said, holding baby Daniel while Thomas and Sarah played in the meadow outside the cabin. "I never imagined this life." "Better than you imagined?" Tobias asked, sitting beside her. "So much better. I thought my life was over when Thomas died. I thought I was too old, too set in my ways, too damaged by disappointment to start over. But you showed me I was wrong." "You showed yourself," Tobias corrected. "I just gave you a reason to try." As the children grew, the store grew with them. Katherine expanded, adding new products and services. She hired more help, training young people in business practices. She became known throughout the region as a fair dealer and a shrewd negotiator. Tobias continued his trapping and hunting, but he also began guiding wealthy men from the East who wanted to experience the wilderness. He was patient with their ignorance and kept them safe, and word spread that Tobias Fletcher was the best guide in California. Together, they built something that neither could have built alone. A business, a family, a life that spanned 2 worlds, the civilized town and the wild mountains. The gossip never entirely stopped. There were always people who remembered that Katherine had been older than her first husband, that she had married a mountain man too quickly, that their life was unconventional. But the Fletchers did not care. They had each other, and that was enough. On their 10th anniversary, the whole town turned out for a celebration. Even the people who had once whispered and pointed came to congratulate them. The store was decorated with flowers, and Sarah Chen's family provided a feast. Mayor Hutchins, now elderly and retired, raised a glass. "To Tobias and Katherine Fletcher," he said, "who taught us all that love doesn't follow society's rules, who showed us that strength comes in many forms, who proved that it's never too late to start over and build something beautiful." The crowd cheered, and Katherine felt tears in her eyes. She looked at Tobias, who was holding baby Daniel while Thomas and Sarah stood proudly beside them, and she felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost knocked her over. This was her life. This was her family. This was her happiness, hard-won and deeply cherished. That night, after the children were asleep and the guests had gone home, Katherine and Tobias sat on the porch of their home above the store, looking at the stars. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night we had dinner?" Katherine asked. "I said a lot of things," Tobias replied, his arm around her. "You said I had spine, that I was willing to work hard, that money doesn't fix everything. I remember. It's all still true." "You gave me the chance to prove it," Katherine said. "You believed in me when no one else did, when I didn't even believe in myself." "You would have figured it out eventually," Tobias said. "You're too stubborn to fail." Katherine laughed. "Maybe, but it was better doing it with you." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of knowing each other deeply. Finally, Tobias said, "I love you, Katherine Fletcher. I loved you when you were 38, and I love you now at 48. I'll love you when you're 88, if we're lucky enough to get there." "I love you too," Katherine said, "my mountain man, my partner, my love." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a man who split his time between guiding in the mountains with his father and helping manage the store with his mother. Sarah took over more and more of the business operations, showing a talent that surpassed even Katherine's. Daniel, the surprise baby, grew into a charming young man who could talk anyone into anything and had a gift for making friends. Katherine's hair turned fully silver, and lines deepened around her eyes and mouth, but Tobias still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. His own hair grayed at the temples, and his body bore the marks of a life lived hard, but he was still strong, still capable, still the solid presence that had drawn Katherine to him all those years ago. When Katherine turned 55 and Tobias 53, they decided to spend an entire year in the mountains. Thomas was 23 now and fully capable of managing the guiding business. Sarah, at 21, ran the store with an efficiency that made Katherine proud. And Daniel, at 18, was attending school in San Francisco, preparing to study law. A whole year, Katherine said as they packed the wagon for what would be an extended stay. No rushing back for winter, no dividing our time. "You sure about this?" Tobias asked. "It'll be hard being cut off from everything for months at a time." "I'm sure," Katherine said. "I want to spend a year living the way you lived for 20 years. I want to understand that part of you completely." The year in the mountains was transformative. Katherine learned skills she had never imagined needing. She learned to tan hides, to make soap from animal fat and lye, to preserve meat for months. She learned to read the weather in ways that went beyond Tobias's teachings, developing her own instincts. She also learned a deeper kind of peace. In town, there was always noise, always demands, always the pressure of society's expectations. In the mountains, there was only the wind in the trees, the call of birds, the crackling of the fire. There was only her and Tobias, living simply, loving deeply. They talked more that year than they had in all the previous years combined, about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, about the children and what they hoped for them, about growing old together and what that might look like. "I never thought I'd live this long," Tobias admitted one night as they lay in bed, the cabin warm from the fire. "Mountain life is hard. I've seen men die from things that wouldn't kill them in town. I figured I'd go the same way eventually." "But you didn't," Katherine said, her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. "Because I had a reason to be careful, because I had you to come home to." He covered her hand with his. "You saved my life, Katherine, not just by loving me, but by giving me something to live for beyond just surviving." "You saved mine too," Katherine said. "I was drowning in that town, in expectations and judgments and the weight of other people's opinions. You threw me a rope and pulled me out." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed. Afterward, Katherine lay in Tobias's arms and thought about how lucky she was. How many women got a second chance at love? How many found a partner who saw them as an equal, who valued their strength as much as their softness? When they returned to San Pedro after their year away, the town had changed. Or perhaps they had changed and saw the town differently. Either way, Katherine felt a new confidence, a new certainty about her place in the world. The store was thriving under Sarah's management. Thomas had expanded the guiding business and was training younger men in wilderness skills. Daniel wrote letters from San Francisco full of enthusiasm about his studies and his plans to return to San Pedro to practice law. "Our children are going to be fine," Katherine said to Tobias one evening as they walked along the beach, the same beach where he had first told her he loved her. "They're going to be better than fine," Tobias said. "They're going to be extraordinary, because they had you as a mother." "And you as a father," Katherine added. "We did good, didn't we?" Tobias stopped walking and pulled Katherine close. "Built something that'll last beyond us." "We did very good," Katherine agreed. They were in their 60s when the next challenge came. Tobias was injured during a hunting trip, a fall that broke his leg badly. For the first time in their marriage, Katherine saw fear in his eyes. "I'm getting old," he said from the bed where he was confined while the leg healed. "Can't do the things I used to do." "None of us can," Katherine said practically. She was 62 now, and her own body reminded her daily that she was no longer young. Her joints ached in the morning. She tired more easily, but she was still strong, still capable. "We adapt." "What if I can't guide anymore? What if I can't provide?" Katherine took his hand. "Tobias Fletcher, you listen to me. We have a successful store. We have investments. We have 3 grown children who adore us. We have a life we built together. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, least of all me." "I just don't want to be a burden," Tobias said quietly. "You could never be a burden. You're my husband, my partner, my love. We take care of each other. That's what we've always done." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, your leg will heal. You'll be back on your feet in a few months. Maybe you won't be climbing mountains like you did at 40, but you'll still be you." She was right. The leg healed, though Tobias walked with a slight limp afterward. He did less guiding, but he trained others, passing on his knowledge. He spent more time in town, helping with the store, becoming a fixture on the main street. People who had once whispered about the widow who married a mountain man now greeted Tobias with respect and affection. He had become part of the community in a way he never had before, and he found, to his surprise, that he did not mind it as much as he thought he would. Thomas married a girl from a neighboring town, a strong young woman who loved the mountains as much as he did. They built a cabin near Tobias's original cabin and started their own family. Sarah married a banker from Los Angeles, a quiet man who appreciated her business acumen and supported her ambitions. They lived in San Pedro and worked together to expand the store into a small chain. Daniel returned from San Francisco with his law degree and opened a practice in town, quickly becoming known for his fairness and his willingness to help those who could not afford expensive legal fees. Katherine and Tobias became grandparents, then grandparents many times over. Their home above the store was always full of children and noise and laughter. The cabin in the mountains became a gathering place for the whole family during summers, 3 generations learning to love the wilderness. On their 25th anniversary, the family threw a huge celebration. The store was closed for the day, and everyone in San Pedro was invited. There was food and music and dancing. The mayor, a young man who had been a child when Katherine and Tobias married, gave a speech about how the Fletchers represented the best of California, the pioneering spirit and the willingness to forge their own path. Katherine, now 63 with silver hair and a face lined by years of laughter and sun, stood beside Tobias, now 61 and still imposing despite the gray in his hair and the limp in his step. They held hands as they had throughout their marriage, presenting a united front to the world. 25 years, Tobias said in his speech, his deep voice carrying across the crowd. 25 years ago, I walked into a store, looking for supplies and found something I didn't even know I was looking for. I found a partner, a friend, a love that changed everything. He turned to Katherine. People said you were too old. They said I was too rough. They said we were moving too fast, that it wouldn't last. But here we are, 25 years later, with 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and a life that's richer than I ever imagined possible. The crowd applauded, and Katherine felt tears streaming down her face. She had cried more in her marriage to Tobias than in all the years before. But they were good tears, tears of joy and gratitude and overwhelming love. "I love you," she said, not caring that everyone could hear. "I love you more today than I did 25 years ago, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." Tobias kissed her, and the crowd cheered, and Katherine thought about how far they had come. From a widow facing ruin and a lonely mountain man to this, a family, a legacy, a love story that had defied all expectations. The years after their 25th anniversary were gentler. They spent less time in the mountains, though they still went up every summer for a few weeks. Tobias's leg bothered him more in cold weather, and Katherine's joints ached, but they were together, and that was what mattered. They sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset over the Pacific, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes the grandchildren would visit, climbing into their laps and begging for stories about the old days, about when Grandma ran the store all by herself and Grandpa lived in the mountains like a bear. Was Grandma really older than her first husband? One grandchild asked innocently one day. "She was," Tobias said, pulling the child onto his lap, and people talked about it. They said she was too old to remarry, too old to have children, too old to start over. "But she wasn't," the child said. "No, she wasn't. She was just right. Just exactly right for me." Tobias looked at Katherine, and the love in his eyes was as strong as it had been that first day in the store. Age is just a number. What matters is what's in here. He tapped the child's chest. "Your grandma had the biggest, bravest heart I ever knew." "Still does." Katherine smiled, her eyes misty. Even after all these years, Tobias could still make her feel like the most important person in the world. When Katherine turned 70 and Tobias 68, they decided to make one last trip to the cabin. Thomas tried to talk them out of it, worried about their health, but they were determined. "We're not dead yet," Katherine said firmly, "and I want to see the valley one more time." The trip took longer than it used to. They had to stop frequently to rest. But when they finally arrived at the valley, it was as beautiful as Katherine remembered. The meadow was full of wildflowers. The stream sparkled in the sunlight. The cabin stood solid and strong, maintained by Thomas and his family. They spent a week there, moving slowly, savoring every moment. They sat by the stream and remembered the first summer Katherine had spent there, how nervous she had been, how Tobias had patiently taught her everything. They walked through the meadow, pointing out places where the children had played, where they had picked berries, where they had watched deer graze. On their last night, they sat by the fire in the cabin, wrapped in blankets. "No regrets?" Tobias asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Katherine said, as she always did. "You gave me the best years of my life, Tobias Fletcher." "You gave me a life worth living," Tobias replied. "Before you, I was just existing, surviving. You taught me how to really live." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. Then Katherine said, "Do you remember what you said to those women, the ones who were gossiping about my age?" "I said you were just right for my years," Tobias said. "You were right. We were right for each other. The timing, the circumstances, everything. It all worked out exactly as it was supposed to." "Fate," Tobias said. "Love," Katherine corrected. "Love and courage and a willingness to ignore what everyone else thought we should do." They made love that night in the cabin, slowly and tenderly, two people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. Afterward, they lay together, and Katherine thought about how grateful she was for every moment, every day, every year they had shared. When they returned to San Pedro, they settled into a comfortable routine. Katherine still went to the store most days, though Sarah ran everything now. Tobias still met with the guides he had trained, offering advice and telling stories. They still walked on the beach every evening, though they moved more slowly now. Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling their home with life and noise. Katherine loved watching Tobias with the grandchildren, seeing how gentle he was with them, how patient. This man who had lived alone in the wilderness for 20 years had become the center of a large, loving family. On a warm evening in June, when Katherine was 73 and Tobias 71, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had been a good day. Sarah had brought the grandchildren by, and the house had been full of laughter. Thomas had stopped by with news that his oldest son wanted to become a guide like his grandfather. Daniel had won an important case and wanted to celebrate with them. "We're lucky," Katherine said, her hand in Tobias's. "We're blessed," Tobias corrected. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Katherine felt a deep contentment, a sense of completion. She had lived a full life, a rich life, a life beyond anything she had imagined possible when she stood in that dusty store as a widow facing ruin. "I love you," she said to Tobias. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." As the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Katherine Brennan Fletcher thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a young bride full of dreams to a widow facing judgment to a woman who had found true love and built a legacy. She thought about the whispers and the pointing fingers, about the people who had said she was too old, that it was unseemly, that it would never work. She thought about Tobias walking into her store that hot August day, a mountain man looking for supplies and finding so much more. She thought about his words spoken with such certainty. "You're just right for my years." He had been right. They had been right for each other, despite what anyone else thought. They had built a life together that was rich and full and deeply satisfying. They had raised children who were making their own marks on the world. They had created a family that would continue long after they were gone. The years continued to pass gently. Katherine and Tobias grew older together, their bodies slowing, but their love never diminishing. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by family, a gathering so large they had to hold it in the town square. When Katherine was 76, she became ill. It was nothing dramatic, just a slow decline that the doctor said was simply age catching up with her. She spent more time in bed, less time at the store, but Tobias was always there, sitting beside her, holding her hand, telling her stories about the mountains and their life together. "I'm not afraid," Katherine told him one day. I've had a wonderful life, more than I ever expected or deserved." "You deserved every bit of it," Tobias said fiercely. "You deserved all the happiness in the world." "I got it," Katherine said, smiling. "I got it all because of you." She recovered from that illness, rallying in a way that surprised everyone. She had 2 more good years, years filled with family and love, and the simple pleasures of a life well lived. When she finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, Tobias was beside her, holding her hand as he had held it for 33 years of marriage. The whole town mourned. The store closed for a week. People came from all over California to pay their respects to a woman who had defied expectations and built something remarkable. At the funeral, Tobias stood tall despite his grief, his children and grandchildren around him. He spoke about Katherine with a voice that shook but never broke. "She was just right," he said, "just exactly right for my years, for my life, for my heart. People said she was too old, but they were wrong. She was perfect, and I was blessed beyond measure to have her as my wife." After Katherine's death, Tobias lived for 5 more years. He spent them surrounded by family, telling stories about Katherine, making sure the grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew about the remarkable woman who had been their grandmother. He went to the mountains one last time, to the cabin where he and Katherine had spent so many happy summers, and he sat by the stream and talked to her as if she were still there. When he died at the age of 79, peacefully in his sleep like Katherine had, the family buried him beside her in the San Pedro Cemetery. The headstone read, "Tobias Fletcher and Katherine Brennan Fletcher, partners in life, partners in love, just right for each other's years." The store continued under Sarah's management, then passed to her children. The guiding business continued under Thomas's family. Daniel's law practice became one of the most respected in California. The Fletcher name became synonymous with integrity, hard work, and the courage to follow your heart, regardless of what others thought. And in San Pedro, the story of Katherine and Tobias became legend. The widow who was older than her first husband had been, who married a mountain man and built an empire. The mountain man who came down from the wilderness and found love in the most unexpected place. 2 people who proved that it is never too late to start over, never too late to find love, never too late to build something beautiful. Their great-grandchildren would sit on the porch of the store, now expanded into a large mercantile, and tell the story to their own children. About how great-grandma Katherine had been a widow facing ruin when great-grandpa Tobias walked into her store. About how people had whispered and pointed, saying she was too old, that it was unseemly. About how Tobias had looked at those people and said, "She's just right for my years." And she had been. They had been just right for each other, 2 souls who found each other at exactly the right moment, who built a life together that defied all expectations, who loved each other with a passion and devotion that never dimmed. Their legacy lived on in their descendants, in the businesses they built, in the town they helped shape. But most of all, it lived on in the story itself, a reminder that love does not follow society's rules, that courage and determination can overcome any obstacle, and that it is never, ever too late to find happiness. The Fletcher family continued to thrive for generations, each one carrying forward the values that Katherine and Tobias had instilled. The importance of hard work, the value of integrity, the courage to stand up for what you believe in, and above all, the understanding that love is not bound by age or convention or the opinions of others. In the mountains above San Pedro, the cabin still stood, maintained by generation after generation of Fletchers. It became a family tradition to spend time there every summer, to connect with the wilderness that Tobias had loved and that Katherine had learned to love. Children grew up hearing stories about their ancestors, about the mountain man and the widow who had defied the world to be together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the valley and the wind whispered through the pines, people swore they could feel the presence of Katherine and Tobias, still together, still in love, still just right for each other's years. The store in San Pedro eventually became a historical landmark, a testament to Katherine's business acumen and determination. A plaque outside told the story of how she had taken a failing business and turned it into a success, how she had defied society's expectations and built a legacy that lasted for generations. But for those who knew the real story, the store was more than just a business success. It was where two people had met and fallen in love. It was where a widow had found hope and a mountain man had found home. It was where a love story had begun that would inspire generations. And so the story of Katherine Brennan Fletcher and Tobias Fletcher lived on, a testament to the power of love, the importance of courage, and the truth that it is never too late to find happiness. They had been just right for each other, and their love had been just right for the ages, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been told they were too old, too different, too anything to find true love. In the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not the businesses they built or the children they raised, but the proof that love conquers all, that happiness is possible at any age, and that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them and have the courage to reach out and grab them with both hands. Katherine and Tobias Fletcher had done exactly that. And in doing so, they had created a love story for the ages, a reminder that true love knows no boundaries, respects no conventions, and lasts forever.